The morning air was cold and sharp when the message reached him. Sergeant Thomas Harlow stood at attention outside Buckingham Palace, his red uniform pressed to perfection, his face showing nothing. But inside, his chest tightened. Something was wrong. He had served the royal family for 12 years. He had seen protocol. He had seen tradition. He had seen loyalty tested in ways the public would never know. But what he heard that morning would change everything he thought he knew about duty. The rumor had started small. A whisper among staff. A phrase caught in a hallway. Then it grew. Within hours, tabloids were screaming the headline across London. Queen Camilla forces Princess Charlotte out of her school. The words were everywhere. Television screens, newspapers, phones lighting up in pockets across the city. Thomas had trained himself not to react. Guards don't flinch. They don't speak. They don't let emotion touch their faces. But when he saw the little girl's photograph on the front page, something inside him cracked. Princess Charlotte, 9 years old. Her smile soft and polite in every picture. The kind of child who waved at crowds and held her mother's hand without being told. And now, according to the press, she was being removed from the school she loved. Not because of safety. Not because of grades. But because of palace politics. Because someone wanted her gone. If you're watching this, make sure to subscribe. Stories like this don't get told often, but they need to be heard. Thomas had seen Charlotte before. Once, during a private garden event, she had walked past him with her brothers. She had looked up at him and smiled. Just a small, shy smile. He had nodded back barely, the way guards do. But he remembered it. He remembered thinking she seemed kind. The kind of child who didn't deserve the weight of crowns and cameras. Now, the allegations were spreading like fire. Sources claimed that Queen Camilla had pressured the school's administration, that she wanted Charlotte moved to a different institution, that the young princess had cried when she was told, that her parents, Prince William and Catherine, were furious but powerless. Thomas didn't know if it was true. He didn't know what happened behind those palace doors. But he knew one thing: the royal family was about to face something they couldn't control. Public anger. By midday, protesters had gathered outside the palace gates. Not many at first. Just a few dozen. But their voices were loud. Protect Charlotte, they chanted. Leave her alone. Mothers held signs with the princess's face on them. Fathers shouted at the guards as if they were responsible. Thomas stood still, his rifle at his side, his eyes forward. But he heard every word. And with every word, the knot in his stomach grew tighter. Then, at exactly 2 o'clock, something happened that no one expected. A black car pulled up to the side entrance. The door opened. And out stepped a woman in a dark coat, sunglasses covering her face. But Thomas recognized her immediately. It was one of the Queen's senior advisors. And she was carrying a folder. A thick, official-looking folder. She walked quickly. Too quickly. Her heels clicked hard against the stone pathway. She glanced around as if checking to see who was watching. Then she disappeared inside. Thomas's jaw tightened. He had seen that look before. The look of someone trying to hide something. The look of someone who knew the world was about to explode. And then his radio crackled. A voice came through, calm but firm. All units, prepare for emergency protocol. Royal statement expected within the hour. His heart pounded. A royal statement. That meant someone was about to speak. Someone was about to try to control the fire before it burned everything down. But Thomas had a feeling it was already too late. The statement came exactly 60 minutes later. It was read by a palace spokesperson on the front steps, cameras flashing like lightning. Reporters shoving microphones forward like weapons. The royal family wishes to address recent allegations regarding Princess Charlotte's education. These claims are unfounded and deeply hurtful. Decisions regarding the children's schooling are made privately, with their best interests at heart. We ask for respect and privacy during this time. That was it. 30 seconds. No details. No denial. No explanation. Just a wall of polite words that said nothing. The crowd outside the gates erupted. Boos echoed off the palace walls. People shouted questions that would never be answered. Thomas stood frozen, his hands gripping his rifle a little tighter than usual. He could feel the anger in the air. It was thick. It was dangerous, and then something happened that guards are never supposed to do. Thomas turned his head, just slightly, just enough to glance at the protesters. And one woman, holding a sign with Charlotte's face on it, locked eyes with him. She didn't say anything. She just stared, and in her eyes, Thomas saw something he recognized. Worry. Fear. The kind of fear a mother has. When she thinks a child is being hurt, he turned back quickly. His face blank again, but the damage was done. He had broken protocol. He had shown he was human. Inside the palace, chaos was unfolding in a different way. Staff moved quickly through hallways, their voices hushed but urgent. Phones rang constantly. Advisors rushed in and out of rooms with papers and tablets. And somewhere deep in the private quarters, a little girl sat on the edge of her bed, confused and scared. Charlotte didn't understand why everyone was talking about her. She didn't understand why her name was on the news. She had simply been told by her parents that she would be changing schools next term. They said it gently. They said it was for the best. But they didn't say why. And now the world seemed to be screaming about it. Her mother, Catherine, sat beside her, holding her hand. Catherine's face was calm, but her grip was tight. Too tight. Charlotte could feel her mother's fear, even if she couldn't name it. "Mummy, did I do something wrong?" Charlotte asked quietly. Catherine's breath caught. She pulled her daughter close. "No, my darling. You did nothing wrong. Nothing at all." But Charlotte had heard the whispers. She had seen the way the staff looked at her that morning. Pity. Sadness. The kind of looks people give when something bad has happened. And she had heard a name repeated over and over. Camilla. She didn't know what it meant, but she knew it had something to do with her grandmother, the Queen. Meanwhile, in another wing of the palace, Queen Camilla sat alone in her study. The curtains were drawn. The lights were low. She held a cup of tea, but it had gone cold an hour ago. Her hands trembled slightly as she set it down. She had not forced Charlotte out of her school. She had not pressured anyone. But she had made a suggestion. A quiet, private suggestion to someone she trusted. She had said, perhaps too casually, that it might be easier for the family if the children attended a school with more privacy, more security, less public attention. That was all. A suggestion. Nothing more, but suggestions from queens are never just suggestions. They are orders wrapped in silk. And someone had taken her words and turned them into action. And now the world thought she was a villain. Camilla closed her eyes. She thought of her late mother-in-law, Queen Elizabeth. She thought of how beloved Elizabeth had been, how untouchable, how perfect in the public's eyes. And she thought of herself, always the second choice, always the one people blamed, always the outsider. She had tried so hard to be accepted, to be kind, to be quiet. But no matter what she did, there was always suspicion, always doubt. And now, this. A knock came at the door, soft but firm. "Your Majesty, the king wishes to speak with you." Camilla's chest tightened. Charles, her husband, the man who had stood by her through everything. But even he would have limits. Even he would have to choose. And when it came down to it, he would always choose his children. As he should. She stood slowly, straightening her dress. "Tell him I'll be there in a moment." Back outside, Thomas's shift was ending. Another guard stepped forward to replace him. The two men nodded silently. No words, just duty, just routine. But as Thomas walked away from his post, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Doubt. He believed in the monarchy. He believed in service. But he also believed in protecting the innocent. And if what the papers said was true, if a 9-year-old girl was being used as a pawn in palace games, then something was deeply wrong. As he left through the side gate, a journalist spotted him. "Excuse me, sir? Do you have any comment on the allegations?" Thomas didn't stop. He didn't look. He kept walking. But his jaw was tight. His fists were clenched, and somewhere deep inside, a decision was forming, a decision that would change everything. That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. He lay in his small flat across the city, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of London outside his window. Sirens, voices, the hum of traffic. Normally, it soothed him, but tonight, it felt suffocating. He kept seeing Charlotte's face, that photograph from the newspapers, her gentle smile, her innocent eyes, and he kept hearing the chants from the protesters. Protect Charlotte. Over and over, like a drumbeat in his mind. At 3 a.m, he sat up. He reached for his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen. He knew what he wanted to do, but he also knew what it would cost him. Guards don't speak. They don't break ranks. They don't go to the press. If he did this, his career would be over. His reputation destroyed. He would be labeled a traitor, a man who betrayed the crown. But if he stayed silent, would he be able to live with himself? He thought of his own daughter. She was 7, bright and curious, full of life. If someone hurt her, if someone used her for politics or power, he would burn the world down to protect her. And Charlotte, for all her titles and privilege, was just a child too. She deserved protection, not from enemies, but from the very people who should have loved her. Thomas put the phone down. Not yet. He needed to know more. He needed to be sure. The next morning, he returned to the palace. The crowd outside had doubled. Now there were hundreds of people. Mothers, fathers, students, people holding signs, people chanting. The police had formed barriers to keep them back. But the energy was wild, angry, desperate. Thomas took his position at the gate, his face blank, his posture perfect, but his eyes were scanning, watching, listening. Then, around noon, a car arrived. Not the usual royal convoy, just a simple black sedan. It pulled up to the private entrance, and the door opened. Out stepped Prince William. Thomas had seen William many times before, always composed, always controlled, the future king. But today, something was different. William's face was tight, his jaw clenched, his eyes hard. He moved quickly, almost angrily, toward the palace entrance, and as he passed, Thomas heard him say something to the aide walking beside him. Just for words, but they were enough. This ends today. Thomas's heart pounded. Something was about to happen. Something big, inside the palace. William stormed through the hallways. Staff stepped aside. Advisors tried to approach him, but he waved them off. He had one destination, the king's private office. He didn't knock. He pushed the door open and stepped inside. His father, King Charles, sat behind a large wooden desk, papers spread out in front of him. Camilla stood by the window, her back to the room. "We need to talk," William said. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Charles looked up. His face was tired. "Warn William, please, sit down. Let's discuss this rationally." Rationally. William's voice rose slightly. "My daughter is being torn apart by the media because of a decision she had no part in. Reporters are camped outside her school. Her classmates are asking her questions. She doesn't know how to answer. And you want me to sit down and be rational?" Camilla turned slowly. Her face was pale. "William, I never intended. I don't care what you intended," William interrupted. His eyes locked on hers. "I care about what happened. And what happened is that my daughter's life was disrupted because of palace politics. Because someone decided her education was less important than appearances." Charles stood. "That's not fair. We were trying to protect her. The school was becoming a security risk. The media attention was? The media attention exists because of decisions made in this palace." William's fist came down on the desk. Not hard, but firm. Enough to make his point. Charlotte loved that school. She had friends there. She was happy. And now she's being uprooted because someone whispered in someone's ear that it would be easier this way. Silence filled the Room, heavy, thick, suffocating. Camilla's voice was soft when she finally spoke. I made a mistake. William stared at her, waiting. I suggested that perhaps a different school would offer more privacy. I didn't order anything. I didn't force anything, but I should have known that my words carry weight, that people would act on them without question. Her voice cracked slightly. I never wanted to hurt Charlotte. I would never hurt her. William's anger didn't fade, but something in his posture softened, just slightly. Then fix it. How? Camilla asked. The story is everywhere. People have already decided I'm the villain. Nothing I say will change that. Then don't say anything, William replied. Show them. Charles stepped forward. What are you suggesting? William turned to his father. Charlotte goes back to her school, publicly, with your support. With Camilla's support, you attend an event there. You show the world that this family stands together, that we protect our children. Not from the public. From anyone who would use them as pawns? Charles hesitated. The optics, forget the optics, William said firmly. Do what's right. Outside, Thomas stood at his post. The crowd was growing louder, more restless. He could feel the tension building. Something had to break. Soon, and then his radio crackled again. All units, prepare for a royal announcement. The king will address the public at 4 o'clock. Thomas's pulse quickened. This was it. Whatever was about to happen would change everything. At exactly 4 o'clock, the palace doors opened. Not the side entrance. Not the private gate. The main entrance. The one used for state occasions. For moments that mattered, King Charles stepped out first. His face serious, but steady. Beside him, Queen Camilla walked slowly, her hands folded in front of her. And behind them, Prince William and Princess Catherine. Together, united, but the crowd barely noticed them, because walking between William and Catherine, holding both their hands, was Princess Charlotte. The little girl wore a navy blue coat and a simple white dress. Her hair was pulled back neatly. Her face was calm, but her eyes were wide. She could hear the noise, the cameras clicking, the voices shouting, the world watching. Thomas felt his breath catch. This was not protocol. This was not tradition. Royal children were kept away from public chaos. They were shielded, protected, hidden. But here she was, walking toward the crowd, toward the storm. The king stepped up to a microphone that had been set up at the top of the stairs. The crowd quieted slightly, though the tension remained. Cameras zoomed in. Reporters leaned forward. The world held its breath. Good afternoon, Charles began. His voice was clear, strong. No, there has been great concern over the past few days regarding my granddaughter, Princess Charlotte, and her education. I want to address this directly and honestly. He paused. The silence was deafening. Decisions regarding the welfare and education of our children are deeply personal. They are made with love, care, and sometimes difficulty. In this case, a suggestion was made with good intentions, but it was acted upon without full consideration of what Charlotte herself wanted. Camilla's eyes glistened. She didn't move, didn't speak. But her pain was visible, Charles continued. As a family, we have reflected on this, and we have listened. To Charlotte, to her parents, and to all of you who have shown such deep care for her well-being, Princess Charlotte will remain at her current school. She will continue her education surrounded by the friends and teachers she loves. And we, as a family, will ensure that her voice is always heard. The crowd erupted, not in anger this time. In relief, in cheers, people clapped. Some cried. Mothers hugged each other. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was something real. Charlotte looked up at her grandfather. She didn't fully understand what was happening, but she knew it was important. She knew people cared. And she knew, somehow, that she was safe. William leaned down and whispered something in her ear. She nodded. And then, in a moment that no one expected, Charlotte stepped forward. Just one step. And she waved. It was a small wave, shy, hesitant, but it was hers. And the crowd went wild. Thomas felt something break inside him. Not in a bad way. In a way that felt like release, like hope. He had spent years standing silent, watching history unfold from the sidelines. But today he had witnessed something different. He had witnessed a family choose love over image, a child's happiness over tradition, as the royal family turned and walked back inside. Thomas caught William's eye for just a split second. The prince gave the smallest nod, barely noticeable, but Thomas understood. It was acknowledgement, respect, a silent thank you to all the guards who stood watch, who cared, who saw. That evening, Thomas sat in a small pub near his flat. The news was playing on the television above the bar. Analysts were dissecting the king's speech. Some praised it. Some called it weak. Some said it changed nothing. But Thomas didn't care what they said. He had seen the look on Charlotte's face. He had seen her wave. And he knew that for her, in that moment, the world had become a little less frightening. An older man sat down next to him, a former guard. Retired 5 years ago, they had served together once. The man ordered a drink and glanced at the screen. "Hell of a day," the man said. Thomas nodded. "Hell of a day, you think it's real? You think they actually care? Or is it just damage control?" Thomas considered the question. He thought about William's anger, Camilla's tears, Charlotte's small, brave wave. "I think they're human. And humans make mistakes. But some of them try to fix it," the older man smiled. "You always were too optimistic, Harlow." "Maybe," Thomas replied. "But someone has to be." As the night wore on, Thomas thought about his own daughter. He thought about calling her, telling her he loved her, telling her that no matter what happened, he would always protect her, always listen, always put her first. He pulled out his phone and sent a text. "I love you, sweetheart. Always will." 3 dots appeared. Then a reply. "Love you too, Dad. See you this weekend?" He smiled. "Wouldn't miss it." Back at the palace, Charlotte lay in her bed. Her mother sat beside her, reading a story. Her father stood in the doorway, watching. The room was warm, safe, quiet. "Mummy," Charlotte said softly. "Why were all those people there today?" Catherine closed the book gently. "Because they care about you, darling. They wanted to make sure you were happy." Charlotte thought about this. Are they always going to watch me? Catherine's heart ached. She brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face. Some people will always be watching, but that doesn't mean you have to live for them. You live for yourself, for the people you love, and will always be here to make sure you're safe. Charlotte nodded. She didn't fully understand, but she felt loved, and for now, that was enough. William kissed his daughter's forehead. "Good night, my brave girl. Good night, Papa." As they left the room, Catherine leaned against the wall, exhausted. William put his arm around her. "We did the right thing," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. "But it's not over. It never really is." "No," William agreed. "But today, we won." 3 days passed. The media storm began to settle. New headlines replaced the old ones. The world moved on, the way it always does. But inside the palace, the scars remained. Camilla had barely left her private quarters. She attended only the most necessary engagements. Her smile was polite when cameras were present, but the light in her eyes had dimmed. She knew what people thought of her. She had read the comments, seen the cartoons, heard the whispers, "Wicked stepmother, jealous queen, the woman who hurt a child." None of it was true. But truth didn't matter in the court of public opinion. Perception was everything, and her perception had been destroyed. On the 4th day, she received a letter. It was delivered by hand, placed on her desk by a trusted aide. The envelope was small, simple, no royal seal. Just her name written in careful, childish handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper, and on it, a drawing, a stick figure family, a tall man with a crown, a woman with a smile, 2 boys, and a little girl with yellow hair holding the woman's hand. Above them, a sun. Below them, grass and flowers. And at the top, in uneven letters, "Thank you for listening. Love, Charlotte." Camilla's breath caught. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. She pressed the paper to her chest and wept. Not from sadness. From relief. From gratitude. From the overwhelming weight of being forgiven by a child who had every reason to hate her. She didn't deserve this. She knew that. But Charlotte had given it anyway, because that's what children do. They forgive. They hope. They love without conditions. Camilla stood and walked to her desk. She pulled out a piece of her personal stationery and began to write. "My dearest Charlotte, thank you for your beautiful drawing. It is the kindest gift I have ever received. I am so sorry for the trouble I caused you. You are a remarkable young lady, and I am proud to know you. With all my love, Grandma Camilla." She sealed the letter and handed it to her aide. "Please ensure this reaches Princess Charlotte today." The aide nodded and left quietly. Camilla sat back down and looked at the drawing again. For the first time in days, she smiled. Meanwhile, Thomas had returned to his regular duties. The protests had ended. The gates were quiet again. Life at the palace had returned to its usual rhythm. But something inside him had changed. He had spent years believing that duty meant silence, that loyalty meant obedience. But now he understood something deeper. True duty wasn't blind. It wasn't silent. True duty meant standing up for what was right, even when it was hard. Even when it cost something. One afternoon, as he stood at his post, a young boy approached the gate. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old. He held a folded piece of paper in his hands and looked nervous. "Excuse me, sir," the boy said quietly. "Can you give this to Princess Charlotte?" "It's a letter. I wrote it for her." Thomas looked at the boy. His uniform. His training. His protocol. All of it told him to say no. To explain that letters must go through proper channels. That guards don't deliver mail. But instead he crouched down. "What's your name, son?" "Oliver," the boy said. "And what does your letter say, Oliver?" The boy looked down at his shoes. "It says, I'm glad she gets to stay at her school. Because I had to change schools once, and it was really hard. I just wanted her to know she's not alone." Thomas felt his throat tighten. He reached out and took the letter gently. "I'll make sure she gets it." Oliver's face lit up. "Really? Really?" The boy grinned and ran back to his mother, who was waiting nearby. She mouthed a silent thank you to Thomas. He nodded and returned to his position. That evening, he placed the letter with the palace mail. He knew it would be screened, checked, possibly never delivered. But he had tried, and that mattered. Weeks turned into months. Charlotte returned to her school. The photographers eventually lost interest. Life continued, but the story didn't end there. Because stories like this never really end. They ripple. They change people. They leave marks. Camilla became quieter in her public role, more careful, but also more present. She began attending more events with the children. Not for cameras, not for image, but because she genuinely wanted to be part of their lives. And slowly, carefully, trust was rebuilt. William and Catherine held their family a little tighter. They made a promise to each other. Their children would always have a voice, always be heard. Even in a world that wanted to control every part of their lives. And Charlotte? She grew. She learned. She discovered that being royal didn't mean being perfect. It meant being human. It meant making mistakes and choosing to be better. Years later, when she was older, a reporter would ask her about that time, about the controversy, about the moment she waved to the crowd, and she would smile and say something simple but profound. "I learned that people care. And that's not something to be afraid of. It's something to be grateful for." But that was years away. For now, she was just a little girl, playing with her brothers, laughing with her friends, living a life that was as normal as a royal life could be. And somewhere in London, a guard stood at his post, his face blank, his posture perfect, but his heart full of something he had almost forgotten: hope. 5 years had passed since that day. Thomas still served at Buckingham Palace, though his hair had more gray now and his back ached on cold mornings. But he had never considered leaving. This was his life. His purpose. He had watched Charlotte grow from a shy 9-year-old into a confident young teenager. She attended public events with grace. She spoke with confidence. And when she smiled, it was genuine. Not practiced. Not forced. Real. One autumn afternoon, during a charity event at the Palace Gardens, Thomas was assigned to security detail. Families had been invited. Children ran across the lawn. Parents chatted over tea. It was a rare moment of normalcy in a world obsessed with formality. Thomas stood near the refreshment tent, watching the crowd, and then he saw her. Charlotte, now 14, was kneeling beside a little girl who had fallen and scraped her knee. The child was crying, her mother rushing over in panic, but Charlotte got there first. She pulled a tissue from her pocket and gently cleaned the scrape. She spoke softly to the girl, making her laugh through her tears. And when the mother arrived flustered and apologetic, Charlotte simply smiled and said, "She's very brave. Much braver than I was at her age." The mother's eyes filled with tears. Not from sadness, from gratitude. From witnessing kindness from someone who could have easily walked past. Someone who had every reason to be distant and untouchable. Thomas felt his chest tighten. This was the girl the world had tried to break. The girl who had been used as a headline, a pawn, a victim. But she had survived. More than that, she had thrived. As the event wound down, Charlotte walked past Thomas's position. Their eyes met briefly. And in that moment, something passed between them. Recognition, respect, a shared understanding of what it meant to serve. To protect, to care. She didn't say anything. Neither did he. But she gave him the smallest smile. The same shy smile she had given him years ago in the garden, and he nodded back, barely, the way guards do. But this time, it meant more. That evening, Thomas sat in his usual pub. The television was on, showing highlights from the charity event. The camera focused on Charlotte helping the little girl. The reporter's voice was warm, admiring. Princess Charlotte continues to capture hearts with her genuine compassion and down-to-earth nature. Royal experts say she represents a new generation of royalty, one that is more accessible, more human. The old guard, Thomas's friend from years ago, sat down beside him. He watched the screen and shook his head in amazement. Who would have thought? After everything that happened, Thomas took a sip of his drink. I always knew. Knew what? That she'd be okay. That they all would be. He paused. People are resilient, especially kids. They just need someone to believe in them. The older man smiled. You sound like a father. I am a father, Thomas replied. That's how I know. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the news cycle through other stories, politics, sports, weather. The world kept turning. Problems kept arising. But for one brief shining moment, something good had happened. Something right, and that was worth remembering. Back at the palace, her private room, Charlotte sat at her desk doing homework. Math problems. History essays. The ordinary struggles of a teenager. Her phone buzzed. A text from a school friend. Saw you on the news. You're famous again, lol. Charlotte smiled and typed back. Famous for being nice. Could be worse, her friend replied with a string of laughing emojis. Charlotte set the phone down and looked at the drawing on her wall. The one she had made years ago. The stick figure family. The sun, the flowers. It was faded now. The colors dull. But she had never taken it down. It reminded her of something important. That family wasn't perfect. That love was complicated. That forgiveness was possible. And that, sometimes, the bravest thing you could do was simply be kind. A knock came at her door. Her mother stepped in. Time for bed soon, darling? 5 more minutes? Catherine smiled. 5 more minutes. As her mother left, Charlotte looked back at the drawing. She thought about that day. The crowds. The cameras. The fear. But also the way her father had held her hand. The way her grandfather had spoken. The way the people had cheered. She thought about the guard who had nodded at her. The one who always seemed to be watching. Not in a scary way. In a protective way. Like he cared. Like he saw her as more than just a princess. As a person, she wondered if he knew how much that mattered. How much it helped to know that someone was looking out for you, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. She hoped he knew. Across the city, Thomas sat on his small balcony, looking out at the London skyline. Lights twinkled in the distance. The city hummed with life. His phone buzzed. A message from his daughter. "Hey, Dad, just wanted to say I'm proud of you. For everything you do," he smiled. His daughter was grown now. In university, studying to be a teacher, she wanted to help kids, protect them, guide them, just like he had always tried to do. He typed back, "I'm proud of you too, sweetheart. More than you know." He set the phone down and closed his eyes. The cool night air felt good, peaceful. He thought about his life. The years of service, the moments of doubt, the times he had questioned if any of it mattered, and then he thought about Charlotte. About the little girl who had been thrust into the spotlight and had come out stronger. About the teenager who now used her platform to help others. About the future queen who understood that power wasn't about control, it was about compassion. Yes, it mattered. All of it mattered, because in the end, the greatest duty wasn't to a crown or a country. It was to each other, to the children who needed protection, to the truth that needed defending, to the hope that needed preserving. And as long as people like Charlotte existed, people who chose kindness over cruelty, forgiveness over resentment, love over fear, then maybe, just maybe, the world would be okay. Thomas opened his eyes and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, a little girl was growing into a remarkable woman. And somewhere inside him, a guard who had once stood silent had found his voice. Not a loud voice. Not a public voice. But a voice that whispered in the quiet moments, "I see you. I believe in you. And I will always stand guard." That was enough. That was everything. And the story, like all the best stories, would continue. Not because it was perfect, but because it was real, because it was human. Because it reminded us all that even in palaces and crowns and protocol and tradition, the most important thing would always be simple. Love, protection, and the courage to do what's right, even when no one is watching, especially when no one is watching.